All right. I think the next person is Marcia. Marcia, please go ahead. Are you ready? First, that is the question I should ask.
I am ready.
All right.
I am ready.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Please go ahead and educate us.
Enormous, instantaneous.
I am a physician associate, so my background is nursing. So I was a nurse for many years. I started my training in 1980. Well, I qualified in 1984. So I've worked in the healthcare system for over 35 years, as well as the education system as well. More recently, I retrained as a physician associate, so I practiced medicine, and currently I am I'm a fellow in the West Yorkshire Health and Care Partnership, delivering a project around coaching. So just move on to the next slide. So what I wanted to talk about really was the connection between neuroscience and storytelling. So just have a look at the connection between neuroscience and storytelling. And it is a very fascinating area of study, and it's something that I have been interested in for a while, particularly around narrative medicine and how that applies to neuroscience. So it involves the understanding of how our brains process, how we process information, how we respond to that, and how we are influenced by stories. And as others have mentioned already, our whole lives revolve around story.
Are you an entrepreneur struggling to stand out in a crowded market? Your secret weapon is your story. Discover how to make your competition irrelevant by owning your story. Want to learn more? Check out our signature program, Own Your Story, a 5-week training to reshape your narrative. The link is what you see on your screen, academy.aclasses.org/story. Now back to the conversation.
So when we're talking about storytelling and how that relates to neuroscience, one of the things, there are 5 things that happen. So we talk about engagement and attention. And when we're talking about engagement and attention, the first part of that would be around neural engagement. So stories have the power, as we know, to captivate our attention, effectively. And neuroscience researchers showed that, the narrative will activate parts of our brain, including those parts of our brains that are sensory as well. And we also have what we call mirror neurons as well. And with mirror neurons, what happens there, when we hear a story, we will connect to that on a kind of cognitive level. And so if we identify as if we're experiencing the event ourselves as well. And that's really important when we talk about trauma as well. So when we're hearing a story, or we're experiencing something, or remembering something, or somebody's telling us something as well, we experience as if we are having that event ourselves as well. And that's how we can connect it with trauma as well. So this neural mirroring enhances our empathy and our engagement with the story that we're actually hearing. Okay. And then we talk about the emotional connection that we have as well. So stories will evoke those emotions within us, and emotions play a crucial role in how we remember and relate to information that we're taking in. So the brain's amygdala, that's the part of our brain that processes emotions, that's really active. It's highly active when we engage with compelling narratives. And also with storytelling, if the story has strong emotional content, then that triggers the release of a hormone called oxytocin, and it's often called the love hormone because it builds bonding and trust between the storyteller and the audience. And then there's memory and learning. So we have this enhanced memories. Stories improve our ability to remember information. And it's the part of the brain called the hippocampus, you know, that part of the region of the brain that's associated with memory formation. And that becomes much more active when we learn information in a narrative format as compared to, you know, writing lists of facts. So, and then we have contextual learning as well. And so the narratives, the stories that we hear provide context. So it makes the abstract things become more relatable and easier for us to understand. And this contextualization helps in embedding information more deeply into our memory networks. So it provides that context for us. So, for example, if we are explaining gravity, let's say, through story, you know, Isaac, I don't know if you all remember Isaac Newton, who talked, you know, he discovered the whole thing around gravity, you know, and he used the story of the apple falling. We'll always remember that because it's a visual illustration of how gravity works. And then we have the emotional connection as well. So stories will evoke emotions, and emotions play a crucial role in how we remember and relate to information. And again, we talked about the, oh, have I just gone back? Sorry, bear with me. I think I might have just gone back. So we're here. Right, so we wanted to talk about, you know, we make sense of the information that we've received, so we can think of it as mental or the cognitive frameworks that we have. So they help, you know, stories help us to organize and make sense of that information that we have. So we're fitting new knowledge into the existing frameworks that we might already have. And so that will have an impact on us. So the story engages the front of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for our higher mental or cognitive functioning, such as reasoning and decision making as well. And so, and I'm talking about this in the context of being in the medical field, which I'll come on to. So we interpret our experiences through these stories, through this cognitive framework. And so the brain naturally seeks patterns and coherence, and those stories provide a structured way of organizing that information. And when we're thinking about it from the perspective of patients, it helps the patient understand, you know, more complex concepts more easily. So the narrative structure that we have when we're working with patients, it provides a context and meaning, making the information that they're receiving as patients more memorable and more relevant to them. So so in terms of self-identity as well, personal narratives and life stories contribute to our own sense of self. And it plays a vital role in how we construct and perceive our own narratives. And then, of course, we have the social connection. So there's what is termed as cultural transmission. So story, you know, as we said earlier, it's a basic way of transmitting culture, our values, and our social norms. So the brain's default mode is when it's active during rest and daydream. It's also engaged when we think about social interactions and the minds of others. And then we have the social cohesion, where we share stories together. So it's about having those social bonds and being in community as well, and listening and sharing others' stories as well. So that really enhances group cohesion and a collective identity. And that's mediated again by areas in the brain that's involved with social cognition. So the other thing to think about as well is persuasion and influence. So there's such a thing as what you call neural coupling. So during effective storytelling, the brain of the storyteller and the listeners, you know, we synchronize So you have this sort of kind of synchronizing activity that happens, and that's what we call neural coupling. And so this alignment enhances understanding and persuasive power. Okay. And then that leads on to what we call the reward pathway. So that means really, so when we have, if we're listening to stories that really engage us, it stimulates our brain's reward pathways, and it releases more chemicals such as dopamine, and it's creating these pleasurable experiences that reinforce the impact and the retention of the story that we're hearing. And then those engaging stories, like I said, stimulates the pathways, releases the dopamine, and we have those pleasant experiences when we hear the story. So I just wanted to, some of this has already been mentioned already, but when we're talking about patient outcomes and communication, the stories engage the multiple brain areas, including, I don't know if you can see it on here, I'm not able to make it any bigger, but the sort of sensory cortex of the brain. So that's where we get the, our sensory details, how we're feeling, the emotion, that kind of thing, including the amygdala as well. The hippocampus, which is around memory, and the prefrontal cortex is for this kind of higher cognition functioning that we have. So we have this widespread brain activation, and that helps us make stories more engaging and memorable. So that's a little diagram that I've put there. So as I said, the sensory cortex will process those sensory details of the story. The amygdala, processes that emotion that's involved or evoked in the story. The hippocampus is involved in our memory formation, and it helps retain the detail of the story. And then we have the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in higher cognitive functioning, and it helps the understanding and the context and the implications of the story that we're actually listening to. And so one of the key benefits then of storytelling in healthcare is really around enhancing patient understanding. So when medical information is being presented through a narrative, it becomes much more relatable, and it's easier to grasp for the patient. So for example, explaining a complex medical procedure through a patient success story can make it more understandable and more relatable to a patient that's coming in with the same issue. And so this is, an image of a doctor that's using a narrative to explain a procedure. Stories can also improve memory and adherence to treatment plans. And this is really important because that's what we want patients to do. We want them to heal. We want them to recover. We want them to be able to have autonomy over their own healing. We want them to be able to sometimes, particularly around chronic conditions, to be able to manage those conditions themselves. So it's about, having some lifestyle modification as well. So it's really important that we can improve memory. So stories do that. It improves memory and adherence to treatment plans. And again, it's, the hippocampus, is activated during the storytelling, and it helps patients retain that medical information. So it's about contextual learning through those stories, and it helps them to remember and to understand instructions better. And so that can be it's a very effective strategy for patients. This whole story narrative is when we're dealing with clients. It also helps us to build empathy and trust as healthcare professionals when we're working with patients. It helps to build trust and empathy, which is crucial in healthcare, and storytelling can significantly aid in this. And so emotional stories can trigger the release of oxytocin, as we mentioned earlier, and that helps to foster trust and empathy between healthcare providers and with patients as well. So when we're sharing those relatable stories, it humanizes healthcare. It humanizes the people that are providing that healthcare, because sometimes, you know, when we're within the healthcare profession, when patients, you know, turn up in the doctor's office or turn up in a clinic, it can sometimes feel like the doctors know everything and the patient knows nothing. And that's sometimes how we relate to those that are, you know, helping us to become better. So it's about sharing those relatable stories, humanizes the interaction, builds stronger patient relationships. And so an example here is if a doctor is sharing a story about a similar, you might be talking about another patient, you know, that's had similar conditions, and it helps to build trust and hope actually for that patient, that there's going to be some relief, that there can be healing around that as well. Then storytelling can motivate, you know, and lead to behavior change. So engaging stories can also motivate patients to make positive health changes by really resonating with them on an emotional level. And narratives are more persuasive than facts alone. You know, if you just gave them patients a list of things that could happen, that's not necessarily going to make behavioral change. But if they can relate to that, and if you can, you know, touch them on an emotional level, that's where you get the deep-seated change and lifestyle modification by the patient themselves as well. So encouraging patients to adopt more healthier behaviors, for example. You know, an example here is a story about a patient's journey to lose weight, for example, and improving their health can be very inspiring if you're working with somebody who's really struggling, but they can hear somebody who's been where they've been and, you know, done the work. You know, that in itself is inspiring. Okay, so these narratives, as I said, you know, they actually impact the emotional and cognitive centers of the brain, and it evokes empathy and triggers the benefits then of behavior change in a relatable context for patients, and increases the likelihood that they will, you know, patients will take steps towards adopting healthier behaviors as well. And I just wanted to just share something in action, really, just to show you how this works. So this was a patient very, you know, numerous years ago, and I've just obviously just changed the details of this patient, but this is a real case scenario that I've just to kind of help illustrate what it is that I'm trying to explain. So here is a reconstruction then, or a reframing. This is this is what we call narrative therapy that actually works. I just wanted to share this example. So this is a patient whose name is John Smith here, 58-year-old gentleman whose background, his occupation was a construction worker. He'd had quite a severe stroke, leading to partial paralysis on the right side of his body. So his current situation when he came to our ward was that he was in rehabilitation, and he was really struggling to accept his new limitation. And there was a feeling of loss of identity and purpose, and there was a lot of depression around what had happened to him.
Thank you for watching. Are you enjoying the video? Let us know in the comment section. My mission is to help professionals like you to own their story. What would I do for you, you might ask? Well, it helps you make your competition irrelevant. Want to learn more? Check out our signature program, Own Your Story, a 5-week training to reshape your narrative. The link is what you see on your screen, academy.aclasses.org/story. Now back to the conversation.
So the first session that he had with it was a therapist actually who happened to be, we'll just call him Dr. John Doe for now. So the healthcare professional was a rehabilitation therapist, and the first session Dr. Doe meets John for the first time in one of the very first rehab sessions. And, Dr. Doe says, "Hi, John, I'm Dr. Doe, and I'll be working with you during your rehab. I understand that you've been through a lot recently. Can you tell me a bit about yourself and your life before the stroke?" So John says, "I used to be a construction worker and I loved my job. It was hard work, but I was good at it. Now I can't even hold a hammer properly and everything's changed." So Dr. Joe then asks John to share more about his life and his accomplishments before having the stroke. And he wanted to emphasize the importance of his skills and his experiences that he'd previously had. So Dr. Doe says, "It sounds like you were very dedicated to your work. Tell me more about what you enjoyed most about your job." And so John says, "I enjoyed building things, seeing the progress every day. I felt proud when a project was completed. It was my way of contributing to the world." So we're going to explore the present moment. So this is now John currently. So Dr. Joe helps John express his current feelings and his challenges, and in so doing, providing him a safe space for him to voice his frustration and the fears that he had about his future. So Dr. Joe says, "I can see how much you valued your work. It must be really difficult to face those new challenges. Can you tell me more about how you're feeling right now?" So John is saying that he feels useless. He can't do what he used to do. And he says, "I'm afraid I'll never be able to work again or be the same person that I was." So you can see those are real valid fears. Now, this man who was very fit, was able to, work, that kind of outdoor work that is quite heavy, now can barely lift a hammer. So we want to reconstruct that story. We want to reframe that story that he's brought to Dr. Doe. So Dr. Doe guides John to reconstruct that, focusing on his strengths and his resilience and his new opportunities for growth and to still contribute. So Dr. Doe, sorry. He says, "It's completely understandable that you feel this way, but I want you to know that your skills and contributions don't disappear because of your stroke." And that's a really important thing to help patients understand. No matter what their condition that they present now with currently, everything that's happened in the past still has relevance to them. And Dr. Doe went on to say that all of this wealth of experience and knowledge that John had could still be used. We just have to think more creatively. So he says, "Let's think about new ways that you can use your strengths. What else have you always wanted to do or try?" So John then says, "Well, I always thought about mentoring younger guys in construction and about sharing his knowledge and helping them to grow." That's a fantastic idea. Your experience can be incredibly valuable to others. Even if you can't work on site right now, you can still make a huge impact. And so, Dr. Doe suggested working together on setting some goals to explore mentoring and other ways that he could stay involved in the field. So then there was some goal setting and ways that John could move forward to achieve his goals for rehabilitation, and also the new activities as well, such as mentoring or even volunteering. So Dr. Joe suggested, let's start with some small steps. How about we set some goals to begin with some online forums where you can share your knowledge. We can also look into local organisations that might need mentors. And in the meantime, we'll continue your physical therapy to help him to gain as much function as possible. And that's what happened. and John was really happy with that idea, and it gave him something to look forward to every time he came for his therapy. Subsequent sessions, he was getting the ongoing support, and he was continuing to see Dr. Doe through and helping him adjust to his new identity, but also about finding meaning in his post-stroke life. Dr. Doe was like, John, you've made incredible progress, both physically and in redefining your role in the construction community. And it was just reminding John that his story was one of resilience and of adaptability. So he's not just surviving what happened to him, but we're finding new ways for him to thrive. And I know that was mentioned earlier about neural pathways. So it was really about reconstructing, it was about creating new neural pathways for John to be able to change his story and to think differently and to really impact those parts of his brain that would make that possible for him. So from John's perspective, by reconstructing his narrative, he shifts from seeing himself as a victim of this stroke that he had to viewing himself as a mentor and as a valuable member of his community. And there was something around that whole emotional well-being as well. So this new story helps improve John's mental well-being, and it gave him a sense of purpose and hope again, that having a stroke and losing the ability to walk properly, to lose the ability to use his hands, all of these things that we take for granted, can leave somebody, when they've not got that anymore, very, very depressed. And I say that from experience, because unfortunately, or should I say fortunately, I myself had a stroke a couple of years ago. Fortunately, it was what they call a transient ischemic attack. So my symptoms didn't last, but I know what it is to not be able to use parts of your body, to not be able to see out of one of your eyes. So I understood, I could really relate to that as well. So it's about engagement and motivation. So he became much more engaged in his own rehabilitation because he had something to move towards, and he was still able to use all his skills and all his knowledge, and to have purpose and meaning in his life again, even with some of the constraints that he did have. But he had new goals to work towards. So the conclusion of John's story is that it illustrates how reconstructing or reframing a patient's story, like John, you can give, especially if they've had a significant health event, we can turn that into a new meaningful narrative, a new meaningful story. So ultimately what we want him to do is enhancing his emotional resilience, his own sense of identity, what that means to him now, and his overall well-being. He's not what he was before, but he's now created something new, something that he is connected to, something that he can still have purpose and meaning in his life. And so the future direction then for story in medicine, in healthcare, there are many, many opportunities for further research into the impact of storytelling on health outcomes. And it's a relatively new, what's the word I'm looking for? A new scope then. So I know at the moment that some of the doctors use something called ICE, which they use in their practice here in the UK at least. They will use that in their consultations. So the ICE is an acronym. So the I stands for ideas, the C stands for concerns, And the E stands for expectations. So they will use that in their consultation with patients. And yes, you're starting to get bits of story, and it's very patient-centered, but it does have its limitations. And I think, and it's, in my opinion, it needs to be used in conjunction with narrative and storytelling, rather than something that is just used in isolation when, doctors and other healthcare professionals see patients in their clinics, because it does have its limitations. It doesn't allow for the expansion of the things that happened for John, for example. It doesn't allow for that. So the whole future of narrative therapy, narrative medicine, I think is huge. And I think, we should be using that more within the healthcare industry. We can look at the exploration of innovative ways to incorporate storytelling into healthcare practice, which I've just said, and look at the potential benefits that include patient engagement, adherence to things like medication and treatment plans, and satisfaction as well. So those are the things that I think, personally would be useful things to happen, more research into that as well. And so in conclusion, storytelling proves effective in engaging the brain's emotional and cognitive centers. And by tapping into these neural mechanisms, stories make medical information more accessible, more understandable, and memorable for patients and others that use the healthcare system. And an example of that, for example, if I remember when I was working, I worked in cardiology, and sometimes it's difficult explaining to patients about how the heart works and where the blood's flowing. But if you use it in terms of, this is like a pipe, and you explain it in basic terminology that patients can really engage in with, then you're going to, instead of using jargon and big words, this is the aorta and this is this vessel and that vessel. If we explain it in terms that they can understand and create story around that, they're much more likely to, firstly to understand, and to really understand the importance of the adherence to whatever it is that we're asking them to do for their own good. And so this approach not only enhances communication between healthcare providers and patients, but also improves, as I said, patient comprehension to the treatment plans and to their overall health outcomes. And on that note, I'd just like to say thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate you. We appreciate that presentation. Also for the question of time, because we already have taken more than 10 minutes, 14 minutes away from the presentation of Neil Martin. So I will not be able to make a comment on your just now. But in any case, yeah, we are coming forward to that.